Dans mon histoire, d'abord,
In my work, the abandoned place was first a playground,
puis comme sujet
then a photographic
photographique,
subject,
et
and
finalement
finally a
comme
space, an
espace,
artist's
comme
studio.
atelier d'artiste. Et ces lieux,
At
au
first,
début,
these places were
étaient
vestiges of
des
war,
restes de la guerre, des
fortifications in the Lorraine region.
dans la région de Lorraine, et puis ensuite dans la ville.
And then, later on, in the city,
Ils ont été des
they became
entrepôts, des
warehouses,
immeubles abandonnés, des
abandoned
immeubles de
buildings,
bureaux,
offices,
abattoirs,
slaughterhouses, hospitals.
et j'ai utilisé
And so I
ces
used these
espaces
spaces like a
comme
studio,
atelier dans lequel
in which I
j'organise
organized
une mise en
a
scène de
mise
la
en scène
peinture
of painting,
et que je
and which I
photographie.
photographed.
La photographie
Photography
étant
being
la
the
mémoire
memory of
de
this
ce
place
lieu
and the memory of what
et
had
la
happened in
mémoire de
this place.
l'action dans ce lieu. Alors, au départ, j'ai
I
commencé
started
à
off with
faire
this
ce
very
travail qui
simple
était
approach,
très simple, qui a une première
this first
phase
phase
qui est
using
la
figurative
peinture
painting.
figurative. Donc, j'arrivais le matin,
I'd arrive in the morning with my paint
dans ma
pots,
chambre,
camera,
photo, et
and go to
je
work on the
sur
walls.
les murs, je
I
peignais
painted
des
these figures as though they were self-portraits,
période de
a
doute,
period of doubt and excitement, which I expressed via these bodies floating, somewhat aggravated in space.
dans l'espace. Et puis tout de suite après,
And then, immediately
des
afterwards,
lieux
I used spaces in which, through linoleum paint, I created sculptural forms.
comme des sculptures. Ce sont des formes
These
qui
were
viennent
forms which
s'ancrer
became
à
part of a
pilier
pillar,
ou qui
or
viennent
which
occuper
occupied a central
le
place in the
centre
space I was
de l'espace où
photographing,
je suis en train
the space in which I
je
worked.
travaille. Et
And so these forms
ces
were
formes
simply
sont simplement
drawn,
dessinées,
hatched out in
appliquées
chalk.
avec de la craie. Et puis ensuite, il y a
And then next, there was a long period where I used paint to create various transparent shapes, different forms.
Avec des formes différentes. Il y a tout un côté
There's the whole
exploration
exploratory
du lieu.
aspect of the
Je
place.
rentre là, j'ai un champ
I go in, there's a
photographique
photographic area which is quite vast,
dans lequel je
and in which I
dois
can see
intervenir.
myself intervening. And at
Et
this
là,
moment,
je commence
I
à
start imagining
imaginer
something.
quelque chose. J'utilise aussi
I've always used
toujours des
Polaroids to
Polaroids
fix a place before starting work on it,
servent à fixer le lieu
to
avant
fix the
d'intervenir.
final composition.
Servent donc à fixer le cadrage définitif. Et ensuite,
And so I can follow, not on a daily basis, but quite regularly as the work evolves, its progress, the elements as they fall into place.
La mise en place des éléments. Je travaille avec un appareil
I've always
photo grand
used a
format
large
qui
format
est une
camera
chambre 10-12
with a 4 by 5 inch chamber,
un système
an optical system with bellows, glass viewfinder,
Et visuellement,
and
quand je regarde
visually,
la
when I look
partie
through the
photo,
viewfinder,
je vois
I can see the image of the space I'm looking at inverted,
l'espace que je suis en train de
because
regarder,
it's a direct optical system. There isn't a mirror in between to set the image right.
intermédiaire qui redresse l'image. Sur le
On the
vernis,
viewfinder, I trace the form I want to reproduce.
Et je reproduis point par point.
Then I reproduce point by point that form in space,
En faisant
going
des
back and
allers-retours
forth
de
between the
l'espace
space
au
and the
dépoli.
viewfinder.
Il y a des
The space is
discontinuités de
discontinuous.
l'espace. Il y
There
a
are walls,
des murs,
intermediate
des
partitions,
intermédiaires, des
beams, all these elements
éléments
are in
sont en
relief.
Et j'ai besoin de
I need to imagine the space as flat,
l'espace plan
because the final image must be flat.
devrait être plane.
And then I realized how crucial architecture was to my work. So I first said to myself, if the space is too small, then I'll cut into the walls, enlarge the space in which I find myself. I'll try to restore to the space a dimension which already exists, but which was divided up according to the needs of the place. And I said to myself, why not build elements which have no other function than to capture light, and finally create a discontinuous plane so as to express a kind of photographic substance. So then I started to build using a circular form, because circular forms allow for a certain freedom, because the spaces in which we live are usually orthogonal, vertical and horizontal, and the curve is not included, at least very rarely. And then I thought I'd draw a second circle, and in doing so, create a sort of ring, two concentric circles. But at the same time, these two circles determine a center, and it's like a sort of metaphor of the eye or of the lens, which let us see. For me, the forms I present are immediately visible and readable in the photograph. They are frontal. And when, on looking at the image, you see flaws, in an instant you enter the space through these imperfections, and you deconstruct the space. And you see that a single form runs through a wall, through several walls, 10 walls if need be. And finally, in the form I've drawn, I will use a single uniform color to harmonize all these different depths and reliefs. I photograph what exists in a real place, what has really materialized. But the images I create cannot speak as to what is really happening in this space. And then I gradually realized that my work had become more complex, enriched, and in addition to my photographic record, I now had notebooks of drawings, projects, writing, to the point where I decided to copy what these notebooks contained onto the walls in the spaces in which I worked, as though they were spoken words, sounds to complement the image. In Italy, in Rome, I did a whole series of works entitled Embrasures. So these works evoked the sun, the incandescence of the sun. The subject is central. It questions the nature of light, so necessary to photography. What is it? Where does it come from? A questioning about the world. Thus, the sun, which is millions of kilometers away, is a ball of flaming fire, which I tried to regenerate, reproduce in this place I worked in. I painted the walls completely red, a cinnabar red, which in Italian means ash, embers. And so I started painting the part of the room the camera sees. But then I actually painted the entire space, the floor, the walls, the ceiling, to have a total physical experience, as if dazzled by the sun. When I close my eyes, the image persists on the retina, and the inner world is entirely red. And in these abandoned places, one could feel this, while being at the same time totally isolated from the outside world. Red is so powerful, it's the heart of incandescence. And it was this kind of inner experience of light which I tried to get across.
Et en même temps
And at
que
the
je
same
fais ce
time as I
travail
worked on
sur
embrasure,
les embrasures,
I wrote
j'écrivais
in my
sur
notebook
mon
thoughts
carnet
on painting,
des réflexions
on
par rapport à la
space,
peinture, par rapport
a
à
little
l'espace,
about
par
death,
rapport
on
un
solitude.
peu à la mort, à la solitude. Et
And in the
finalement,
end, I said to
je me suis dit,
myself,
mais pourquoi pas les
why not
écrire
write directly on the
directement
walls and
sur
on the
le
floor?
sol ou sur les murs. Et
And
donc
so
on peut
you
voir
see
certaines
some
de
of these
ces œuvres
works with a text
avec
in
ce texte
perspective
écrit
written all
sur
over the
le
floor,
sol, en perspective,
whose meaning is
et
no
dont
longer
le sens n'est
comprehensible,
plus compréhensible,
but where
mais
certain
qui, d'une
words
certaine
allow
manière,
for a second
permet
meaning
d'avoir
parallel
un
to the real
deuxième
meaning.
sens parallèle au sens réel. Une œuvre pour moi,
For me,
c'est
a piece is a concentrate of meditations,
méditation,
poetic
de moments
moments,
poétiques, de
work, paint,
travail, de peinture,
light,
de lumière, de
photography.
photographie. C'est quelque chose qui
It's
semble
something which
être
seems almost immaterial,
immatériel. Et
and I imagine
j'imagine
that
que c'est
it
ça
is
qui
this which
produit
produces the spiritual
le
in art.
spirituel dans l'art. Assez régulièrement, je vais
I go walking
marcher
in the
au
mountains
Népal,
of
dans les
Nepal
montagnes,
quite regularly,
et je me suis demandé comment je
and I
pouvais
ask myself how I
introduire ces
could bring
voyages,
these
comment je
journeys into my
pouvais
work, how I could
introduire
bring in
ces
these
marches dans
walks
le
in this
paysage,
landscape,
qui sont comme
which,
des
in a
moments
different
aussi
way, are also
de
moments of
méditation,
meditation and poetry.
des moments poétiques sous une autre forme. Et finalement, c'est par l'intermédiaire des cartes
And it was
d'état-major, qui
using
sont
ordnance
comme
survey
une
maps,
sorte de
which are a
représentation
kind of
abstraite
abstract, almost
réelle,
scientific
presque
representation
scientifiquement
of the
de
real
la
world,
réalité, que
of
j'introduis dans
reality,
les espaces au lieu
that
d'utiliser la
I
couleur,
reproduced in the
au lieu
spaces
d'utiliser
using contour
à
lines
la craie,
and the directions in the
j'utilise les
map,
courbes de niveau,
instead of color or
j'utilise
chalk marks,
les
the
indications qui sont sur
landscapes
la carte,
I have walked
et
in.
je reproduis ces paysages dans lesquels j'ai marché. Toutes mes œuvres ont
All my works
comme
are named
titre
after the city
la
in
ville
which the
dans
work was
laquelle
done,
l'œuvre
with
est
the year.
réalisée, avec l'année. Donc moi,
So, for me, the problematic changes, shifts, according to the country I'm working in.
Et finalement, dès que j'ai
The
été
moment I
artiste,
became an
tout de
artist,
suite,
I immediately
j'ai
began to
commencé à
travel.
voyager. Et finalement, j'ai dit, bon,
And I said to
ça va
myself,
être comme une sorte de
okay,
tour de
mine
vent.
is going to be
Je
a kind
vais
of
montrer
wandering
le
life,
coin où
so
je suis
I'll
et
mark the spot
j'essaie
where I am and try
de
to
créer comme
create
une
a
sorte de
network
réseau
around the world
autour du
of the
monde,
places
des
I've
endroits
been,
où j'ai été
meaning that,
et qui
in the
font
end,
que je
I will have
m'approprie
appropriated
finalement
the nowhere.
le nulle part.